Okay, so the outline for today's presentation will be this. Basically, we're going to start with the cross-border liquidity management, looking at what led to the establishment of the IILM itself. Then we'll look at the IILM Sukuk, how we have fulfilled the mandate and the track record. And finally, we'll look at the impact of COVID-19 pandemic itself. Yes, we were impacted one way or the other. I'm going to show you some graphs today to actually prove this. And basically, the journey of the IILM started with the IFSB, and there was this kind of what they call the task force established at IFSB to look into the need for an Islamic money market, an effective one for that matter. And they identify specific issues, including the need to have tradable instrument in the market itself, and talking about the high quality assets as well. So these were some of the issues that we identified at the very beginning. And the IILM actually came up at the end of the whole curve. In 2010, the central bank governors came together because, as you all know, the central banks are in charge of their monetary policies in their respective jurisdictions. So they needed a cross-border institution that will actually play this role at the global level, and why we exist, basically. And they all came together, including the Qatar Central Bank. And thanks to the support of Sheikh Abdullah, the current governor of the Qatar Central Bank, who has been very supportive. And he's even the chairman of the IILM governing board for this year, and he's been very supportive. So they all came together in 2010 to establish this institution to actually cater to the need of the cross-border liquidity management among institutions offering Islamic financial services. Now, you'll note something. We did not just say Islamic banks, but we mentioned institutions offering Islamic financial services, and that's what we call IIFS, because you do have conventional banks that actually have Islamic windows or who actually trade on our instrument at the secondary market level. So we actually have to cover the whole scope of the banks that are involved in this. Now, the IILM actually aims to enhance cross-border investment flows, international linkages, and financial stability by creating what they call a more liquid Sharia-compliant financial instrument for institutions offering Islamic financial services. The policy mandate, which I'll be repeating throughout today's lecture, actually is enshrined in Article 4 of the IILM Articles of Agreement. And the primary objectives of this institution is to facilitate cross-border liquidity management amongst the institutions offering Islamic financial services by making available a variety of Sharia-compliant instruments and commercial terms to suit the varying liquidity needs of the institution offering Islamic financial services. Now, I'd like to actually pause for a while to explain the issue of on commercial terms. I mentioned on commercial terms here. Basically, yes, somebody will say you're not a bank. Yes, we're not a bank. We are driven by our policy, the policy mandate itself, which is enshrined in all our governing documents. So we are not a money-making kind of institution. We're not a profit-oriented institution. And we do actually tell our counterparties, the market participants, the asset providers, as well as our primary dealers, we tell them the same thing. We are actually not a profit-oriented institution, but definitely we need to make some profit to be able to pay, our salaries and other things. So that's why we have to offer some of these products on commercial terms. But again, I'm going to mention something later regarding our long-term funding, because we don't just provide short-term instruments. So there's also the long-term funding aspect, which many sovereigns have benefited from. And I think this aspect was very, very relevant during the peak of the pandemic. We were able to fund a number of, sovereigns, which I'm not actually authorized to mention to you today. So that's one. Now, the second major important policy mandate of the IILM is to foster regional and international cooperation to build robust liquidity management infrastructure at the national, regional, and international levels. Now, this is quite important. Now, when you talk about liquidity management infrastructure, we'll talk about the primary market as well as the secondary market. Yes, we've been doing well at the primary market level, but now just I think about a few years ago, we've been trying to build the secondary market, and we've seen a lot of momentum in the secondary market. And I'm going to show you some data on the secondary market during the pandemic itself. We are still in the pandemic, but at least you're going to see the data, how we had an initial decline and how the momentum picked up later. So this is quite important for us to actually recognize some of the impact of COVID-19 pandemic, on liquidity management across different jurisdictions. Now, I'm going to move to a kind of a general discussion on alternative instruments that were available before the IILM was established. And I think this is quite important for us to know. And some of these are still available today. So they are not things that have disappeared with the establishment of IILM. As you will see subsequently, we only have a $4 billion program. And that is just a drop in the ocean. It's nothing compared to, if you look at the the balance sheet of Islamic banks globally. I mean, $4 billion is nothing basically. So we feel there should be more alternatives, and this will be part of my conclusion today. When I conclude today's lecture. But one thing it's important that before the establishment of the IILM, there were a number of tools or instruments that were in the market, and some of them or most of them are still available today. Of course, you have the long-term support, which is still there. And again, the only thing we had at that time was a limited supply of some of these, both at the primary and the secondary market. And again, we all know, I mean, the issues with the long-term support, the tradability issue is always a problem, basically. The second point is the commodity moreover placement, which is still the most common or mostly used liquidity instrument amongst Islamic financial institutions across the world. But again, it has its own downside. It's not tradable in most cases. I mean, in all cases, it's not tradable. Then you do have a counterparty credit risk again. So you have to know who you're dealing with, what's the rating of the bank, and the possibility of a default ultimately. Now you have some other kind of issues relating to systemic risk. Again, talk about Islamic financial institutions trading among themselves. Let's say if there is a crisis, then it's going to affect all of them. So these are some of the tools you have. And again, of course, I mentioned the central bank tools, which is very common. I mean, it's still there. I mean, Malaysia, Qatar, and many of the central banks in the Muslim world, they do have their tools. They have actually issued, within their local market, and most of the banks actually use this as liquidity instruments. But again, as I told you initially, this is why they felt there's a need for a cross-border instrument, and that's why they established the IILM in 2010. In fact, the central bank governors came together and sat at a meeting at the World Bank in Washington, D.C. to ratify the establishment of the IILM on the 25th of October 2010, just to ensure there is this kind of cross-border instrument, which in a way complements their kind of monetary policies at the national level. Of course, cash is the most common kind of instrument, but again, there's no return. I mean, if you keep cash, you always have cash, definitely. You're not going to get anything. I mean, in some jurisdictions, you have to even pay to keep cash now in Europe. I mean, looking at the rates that are actually going into the negative territory. Now, some of the things I'll be saying today will be repetitive, but again, I think it's important for us to understand this before we go into the impact on the pandemic. Now, the IILM solution, as I've discussed earlier on, is actually meant to provide a sound infrastructure to enhance the ecosystem itself. This is the problem the governors of the central banks identified back then, and they just felt there's a need to fix this problem, and that's why they established the institution. Now, we are expected to provide regular supply of Islamic liquidity management tool. Again, this means whether there's pandemic or not, we have to be in the market. As I'm going to share with you later, we are issuing $1.110 billion in 2 weeks' time. So whether there's pandemic or not, even at the peak of the pandemic in April 2020, we were in the market. I mean, we had to issue, even though the yields actually spiked. I mean, which was expected, and that was not unique to the IILM itself. Now, again, the IILM is to provide a low-risk sovereign-backed kind of liquidity instrument. Again, we have a program, it's a Cook program, which is rated A1 by S&P. And the program has high-quality assets, which are sovereign assets. So these are the assets that back our short-term issuances. They are mostly long-term assets of up to 15 years. They are the assets that actually back our short-term issuances. So in a way, we actually lend long and borrow short. But our main mandate is more of the short-term, horizon. So this is why we actually exist. And again, we are actually expected to create appropriate infrastructure for the tradability of the instrument itself, that you cannot just buy to hold. You should be able to trade on the instrument ultimately. Buy today, trade it next minute. And this is why, while doing the structuring, a lot of brain work goes into it, because this is where we ensure the Sharia acceptability of the structure itself. And this is why we talk about widely acceptable and tradable Islamic instrument. We have to ensure that the structure is properly done, and it has to go through the Sharia filter. We have an eminent Sharia committee that actually, examines the whole thing. So for us to ensure that the instrument is not only issued at the primary market, but it's also tradable at the secondary market itself. Now, let me actually move on to the aspect of specifically on the IILM Sukuk and our track record. The mandate and objective, which I've explained earlier on, it's what you can see on the screen if you see on the screen, basically. And here we talk about enhancing cross-border investment flows, international linkages. I'm not going to waste much time on this because I'll rather prefer to focus on a number of charts, which I'll be discussing shortly. But again, it's very important for us to note that pricing benchmark, talking about Islamic money market curve, this is part of the mandate, and this is in the articles of agreement the members, the central bank governors signed at inception. This is very relevant today, particularly when we're talking about the LIBOR transition, which is expected to end, I think, by the end of this year, even though for the USD denominated transactions, it's been postponed till, I think, June 2023 or thereabouts. So we are monitoring some of the developments, but again, creating an Islamic money market curve, I think, is something very important. It's been missing. But again, I want to anticipate another question. Somebody will ask me, hey, what do you benchmark against? It's you benchmark against LIBOR. Is Sharia compliant? Yes, scholars have actually said Sharia compliant. And there's no issue with that because it's just a benchmark. We are not using it as the main kind of a tool. You're just benchmarking against it, and ultimately you determine the final pricing. And in IILM, we've actually changed the whole game recently with the introduction of what they call the competitive auction. Again, this was anticipated at the beginning, yes, but we decided to actually go with what they call the agreed bid. But now, I think about 2-3 years ago, we actually migrated to what they call the competitive bid methodology, which allows for kind of price transparency, price discovery itself. At the IILM, we don't even know what the price will be at the end of the day. What we do is we just give the market the pricing guidance, and at the end of the day, we tell them to bid for 3 hours, and at the end of the day, we're surprised that, oh, this is the ultimate profit rate we're going to pay to the Sukuk holders. So this is quite important, and this will allow us to build Islamic yield curve over time. But again, for this kind of thing, you need a lot of data points to be able to actually achieve this. And this is why, as a CEO of an international Islamic Liquidity Management Corporation, what I always tell my colleagues, in AOFI, in IFSB, IFFM, I always tell them we have to work together on a number of fronts to develop the Islamic finance industry at the international level. So this aspect of Islamic money market curve, I think, is very important. And I have actually nominated a number of staff to join some of the task force in IFFM as well as IFSB to help them in developing their white papers on some of these things. So I think it's important I actually highlight that. Now, some of the things I have mentioned before, I'm going to skip some of these slides, but just very quickly, the IILM basically is an asset-backed commercial paper program, which it's USD denominated for now. But again, you should bear in mind that we can issue in any reserve currency. But at the moment, we've been issuing in US dollars for obvious reasons. And it's a short-term paper, and it can actually go from 1 day up to 364 days. And I can tell you today, as you will see in some of the charts I'll be showing you later, we have issued even a 2-week paper, a 3-week paper, and even a 1-month paper. The 1-month paper is very relevant for the Basel III kind of, the LCR kind of framework. So I think it's something very important for the banks. And we've seen an uptick in the interest in the 1-month paper. And that led to even the increase in the 1-month Sukuk we've been offering to the market because it helped them a lot. And this happened even at the peak of the pandemic itself. I'll come back to that later. And again, being a frequent issuer, rolling over issuances till maturity of the long-term underlying Sukuk, this is the model which I mentioned earlier on, that we have the long-term assets to back the short-term liabilities, as it were. Now, it's a low-risk kind of paper, low-risk Sukuk, investment-grade short-term A1 rated program by S&P. Again, I know someone will ask me why S&P alone. For now, it's still S&P. Hopefully, we're going to get another rating from any of the top rating agencies soon. But I think this is important to know that it's an A1 rated paper, and it's widely acceptable, in the industry. And yes, I have a slide for you regarding the HQLA status of the paper, because this is important for banks to look at the regulatory treatment of the paper in their respective jurisdictions. Yes, we have about 10 different members at the moment. One of them is a multilateral organization, but 9 are central banks. They are sovereign entities. They have given varying kind of treatment to the paper, and this is something you're going to see later. Again, we are working towards harmonization of the paper, which we feel is very important for the industry. Again, how do we distribute the sukuk itself? Is our sukuk listed? No, not for now. Maybe this will be considered later. Again, we're still having internal discussion on this. However, we do have a diversified network of primary dealers, and they are actually the market makers. They help to deepen the secondary market, which is one of our major objectives as an institution. And you'll see some of the data regarding the secondary market shortly. Again, this is just to show you in terms of the short-term instrument universe. I think we'll have I've mentioned some of these things, what you have in the market at the moment, and the value proposition of the IILM being different from what you have in the market. Now, this slide I think is very important, and I'm going to spend some time, explaining this slide here because it gives you the true picture of the IILM Sukuk program. Now, at the top of it, you have the sovereign asset providers who are providing these assets to the IILM. These are long-term assets. Some of them could be Ijara, they could be Musataha, they could be Murabaha, they could be Wakala. But mind you, the program itself is a Wakala program because we do have 2 SPVs in Luxembourg. You have the IILM holding, which actually hold the assets. It's actually funds some of these long-term assets, but gets the funding from the issuer. That's the second SPV. And we are here in Kuala Lumpur as the investment advisor and the program administrator managing the program itself. And again, there is, I've mentioned the rating of the program is A1. Underlying assets, they are actually highly rated assets from different sovereign. I'm going to give you a chart later that gives you the breakdown of the rating of the assets in the pool. Don't ask me where are the assets? Where are they? I'm not going to tell you the jurisdiction. But again, you're going to have a chart that tells you, it gives you an idea of where they are. But I'm not going to mention any specific country due to confidentiality reasons. But one thing you're going to note is, I think it's very important for us to look at the aspect of the reserve, the timing mismatch. This is something very important because now you're booking long-term assets, and based on those long-term assets, you're using them to fund your short-term liabilities. So typically, you're going to have a gap in risk. So to actually mitigate this gap in risk, one important component which the rating agencies have built into the program, which is part of their methodology for rating a typical kind of ABCP program, which is based on a structured finance methodology, is what you call this kind of 2% timing reserve, which you have to keep as part of the regulatory requirement, so that when you are ready to pay maturing sukuk or you want to pay the profit, let's say, there is anything, you actually have something somewhere. Because again, some of the assets pay like every 6 months, some of them every 3 months. So you must actually be liquid to be able to provide a liquid instrument to the market in a way. So this is why it's important to actually have that part. Apart from this, I think the program has been certified. It's a Wakala program certified by the Sharia Committee. Currently, the Sharia Committee is chaired by Sheikh Ali Al-Ghari from Saudi Arabia, an eminent scholar, which you all know. And you have some other scholars sitting on the board. So this is actually the structure of the whole program we have, which actually issues the HQLA sukuk to the market. This is just another way of providing you the unique hybrid program. It's the same thing, but actually put in a different way. The rating methodology, as we said, is based on ABCP methodology. Distribution is based on the central bank models because the central banks actually use the primary dealership network. This is their model. So you can see the rating on one side basically is based on the ABCP methodology, structured finance, which is purely private sector driven. While on the other side, when we distribute the sukuk itself, we use the central bank's model. And we do have these contractual commitments with the primary dealers, and which they actually honor. And some of them are in Qatar. We thank them for their contribution so far. Now, let's go into some of the charts so that, again, this is where you're going to see the track record. Since the inaugural issuance in 2013, as you can see, August 2013, on perhaps, I don't know, maybe on your left hand of the screen, I don't know whether my image is mirrored there. Now, we started inaugural issuance in August 2013, and since then we have issued over 137 sukuk, totaling about 66 billion US dollars today. And the current outstanding volume has stabilized at $3.51 billion since last year after we upsized the program to $4 billion. You can imagine we upsized the program to $4 billion during the pandemic, at the peak of the pandemic. Why? Because the demand increased. We needed to provide more to the market. That's on one side. And we needed to provide more funding to the market as well. More funding on the long side to sovereign entities across the world. But I think we only funded 1 or 2 sovereign entities during the pandemic. And again, we are open to funding more going forward. But again, to be able to fund them, we needed to increase the program size. And that's why the upsize happened at the peak of the pandemic. And this was something that was not supposed to be done during the pandemic. But again, alhamdulillah, we were able to do that. And the reason for the periodic drop, as you can see in the chart, sometimes you see a drop and you see a pickup as well later. And we stabilized $3.51 billion subsequently. Now, the reason for this periodic drop in the volume of the short-term sukuk offered to the market is due to the varying maturity profile of the assets within the IILM asset pool. Some of them are like 5-year sukuk, I mean the long term. Some are like 10 years, some are 8 years. So when anyone matures, before you can actually originate more, then it goes down. And the implication of this is that we cannot issue any sukuk, any short-term sukuk, beyond the volume of the long-term assets we have in the pool. So for every dollar we issue in the market, there must be a corresponding asset to back such issuance. And I think this is something very important. So that's why once any of our asset matures, then we have to automatically reduce the volume of our short-term issuances. So this is the unique nature. We have to be Sharia compliant. So we are not just issuing anything. It has to be backed with high quality assets, long-term assets for that matter. Now, this is just a kind of a snapshot of the way we have increased the program and offer different tenors. And I think it's very important. And I would like to spend some time explaining this particular chart. We have continuously increased our offering to the market. Now, you will notice that even during the pandemic itself, this is when we actually issued more to the market. Why? And because we increased the program size as well. So in 2013, let me start with 2013. The IILM started with the benchmark size of 3 months. And that's what you see there. And we're able to issue 2 sukuk that year. Now, I would like to draw your attention to 2019, where we introduced innovative sukuk issuances to fulfill the liquidity needs of institutions offering Islamic financial services. And if you see 2019, after what they call the market-wide kind of consultation, we do the market sounding, we decided to introduce the 1-month sukuk. Subsequently, we also introduced a 2-week and 3-week sukuk. And it was highly accepted, widely accepted in industry. In fact, I think the IILM received an award from Triple Assets, for the best Islamic finance institution. And again, it was based on the unique innovation we had during that year to introduce the 2-week and 3-week sukuk, as well as the 1-month sukuk for the first time. And at the peak of the pandemic in March 2020, the IILM was able to address the demand of high quality liquid papers, which hit the highest level since the GFC in 2008, 2009. And how did we do that? We did that by successfully issuing various tenures, allowing Islamic banks not to suffer further from the adverse market conditions and to comply with their own regulations. They do have their internal regulations. And this was more appreciated in jurisdictions where the IILM sukuk benefited from the regulatory treatment. And the total volume of the IILM monthly issuances remained unchanged, while some tenors were adjusted to fit the investors' needs of liquid papers. As regulatory requirements became paramount, in this context of uncertainty, the need for papers classified as HQLA, high quality liquid asset of level 1, followed suit. The banks mainly use very short tenors, as you all know, to fill up this requirement. Therefore, the IILM chose to increase the supply of 1-month tenor from 200 million in 2019 to 400 million today, which received a strong demand indeed, I mean, most of the IILM desks you have in banks and Islamic financial institutions were actually looking to park cash in the short-term bucket through safe haven instruments. And the IILM became a safe haven instrument at that time. And this chart actually says it all. And you can see the 2020 data at the peak of the pandemic, what we're able to offer to the market. And I can tell you, I mean, this year, again, we're starting the year on a very good note. And I'm going to show you some data later. I think up to date, we've reached up to $5 billion issuances in Q1, close to $5 billion already. And we've had a series of kind of tenors, you know, in our issuances already. Okay, now this actually just shows you, I'm not going to spend much time on this. This shows you where we are in the market globally. And I know somebody may ask, hey, this is not the total issuances you have in the market. Yes, what we are showing here basically excludes private placements, and it's only focusing on US dollar sukuk. It doesn't include any kind of local currency sukuk. So this is what we're actually focusing here. We need to see this because we use this benchmark to be able to position the IILM issuances within the global sukuk universe in US dollars. And it's important for us. And I can tell you, we report this to our board every quarter. It's something very important for us to see where we are and how are we performing. Do we need to actually offer more? Because again, as I told you initially, we are policy driven. So, and the government is sure that we are always on our toes to provide the short-term, high-quality liquid asset to the market. You can see the Q1 data already. I mean, see where we are. The Q1 looks interesting. The total USD sukuk issuance, you know, it's about 6 billion, and we are like 69% of that. Again, towards the end of the year, this percentage will reduce on our own part because then you'll have had more issuances in the market. And this slide actually just provides a kind of a breakdown of who buys our sukuk. Again, the way we actually prepared this slide, the presentation today, it's to ensure that we anticipate most of the questions that will be coming from the audience. So somebody will ask, who buys your short-term sukuk? So now we're showing the 2020 financial year data as well as the Q1 2021 data. This is the latest data, and I thank my team for actually working on this to actually provide the data on time. So you can see our focus is mainly Islamic banks. Banks actually constitute about 79.2% of the investors, while within that kind of universe, you have Islamic banks actually taking about 73%. So I think this is quite important. This is our policy mandate, and we cannot joke with this. So this is why it's important for us to report this on a regular basis as well to all our stakeholders. Yes, you do have private banking and the high net worth, the asset managers, pension funds, central banks as well, and some supras buying our sukuk. But our primary mandate, brothers and sisters, it's more of the banks and Islamic banks in particular. So this is where we are. And for this Q1, now we're in Q2, we'll see how we improve on the data, hopefully. Now, this actually shows you our offering to meet the demand. Now we are actually taking a step backwards to January 2020, just before the pandemic hit the world. And again, we are forward looking to see what we're going to do in the next coming months. And I think this is very important for the audience, particularly those of you who are from different banks in Qatar and elsewhere across the world. It's good for you to see what we've done in the past and see what we're going to do in future, basically. Now, you know, if you want to buy our sukuk, even if you're from any of the Qatari banks, you can do that within the next 2 weeks as well. So this slide is quite important, and it's the right part of it, which is a bit bright. It's actually called the indicative issuance calendar, which provides you a snapshot of the volume of our monthly issuances during the pandemic. We are still there in the pandemic, as I said earlier on. Now, we are driven by our policy mandate, and we cannot afford not to fulfill the mandate. That's why we have to be in the market every month. Whether sun, whether rain, whether pandemic or not, we have to be there. So this is where we are. And as I told you earlier on, the next sukuk auction of 1.110 billion US dollars is scheduled for May 4th this year. And it will be offered in 3 tranches of 1, 3, and 6 months. So this is something very important. So you can see the consistent kind of issuances we've been making. And we have actually been doing this not for any other thing, but to fulfill the demands of our stakeholders, institutions offering Islamic financial services. Now let's look at the real demand. This is quite interesting. Now we've talked about the issuance calendar. We're moving on. Let's compare the real demand and the issued amount itself. And I think this is something important. And we track this even in our press releases. We always track this because it's very important for us. This drives our policies internally, whether we should increase the program size to better fulfill our mandate. So here you see the real demand. The milestone we achieved in 2020, whereby we actually increased the program size from $3 billion to $4 billion, was driven by the increasing demand from the market for a high quality money market instrument. So despite increasing the supply, what you can see here in this chart is that the real accumulated demand keeps increasing. So the more we issue, the more liquidity we see at both primary and secondary. So I think this is quite important. This is real-time data, and I think it's very important to share this with participants for them to see how we've been able to actually fulfill. And you can see the time horizon from January 2020 to April 2021. The whole pandemic we're talking about actually was within this period. And again, this is what I mentioned earlier on. Don't ask me further questions on this. This is the asset breakdown, and the breakdown is quite self-explanatory. You do have the rating on one side. We have a highly rated asset portfolio. We have a AAA asset. I mean, you can imagine that. And you do have the AA minus and the A. For instance, if I remove the A part, that means my program rating could be A1 plus, which will be the highest rating in terms of short-term issuances. So there are a lot of things we are looking into internally. In terms of our kind of strategy going forward. But again, this rating breakdown I think is very, very important. And seeing a AAA asset, that tells you a lot about the quality of our asset pool. And I think again we originated this during the pandemic year. Having a AAA asset during the pandemic year for the first time in history. The regional breakdown is quite clear and it's self-explanatory. And again, this is what you should expect because again, the Islamic finance industry is concentrated within a particular region. We all know the GCC. Then you have Malaysia, Southeast Asia as well. But again, that's why you have this data. You have the GCC taking up to 84%. Of where our assets are, and apart from that, the sector breakdown, whether they are sovereign, supra, or government-related entities, again you have a breakdown there. 70% of our asset providers are actually sovereign entities. Supras are also allowed to provide assets to the IILM because they are also in a way they are sovereign entities because they are owned by sovereign. They are the international bodies. And ultimately, the GRE are government-related entities. These are very important entities. Again, they are kind of quasi-sovereign entities in a way. So that's that breakdown. The final one is on the tangibility ratio. This is very, very important when it comes to the tradability of the paper in the secondary market. And it's something very important. And this distinguishes our paper from even the Commercial Murabaha. Yes, whatever we are paying, the all-in profit we are paying for our short-term sukuk may not be as high as what you will get for the Commercial Murabaha, but it's very important for you to be able to liquidate the paper, liquidate your sukuk within the next second. Once you buy it now, how do you do it? So I think it's important. So these are some of the things we consider when we structure the sukuk itself. We actually have series of discussions, with a lot of iterations with our Sharia committee to ensure that the assets we are bringing are actually mostly tangible assets, so that we can ensure that ultimately the sukuk itself will be tradable. So the tangibility ratio is something we monitor very closely on a regular basis, and I think it's important to report that as well to the public today. I think, I don't know, maybe this is the first time we're showing some of the slides. Now, this is actually a kind of a global picture of where we are when it comes to direct treatment of our paper. Again, this is still a work in progress, and we're working on it. Just to clarify that this is a core item of liquidity management, and again, it helps to support our mandate, which is to provide the market with high credit liquidity solutions. So when some of the jurisdictions, I mean, most of the jurisdictions you see on the screen are IILM members. Yes, from Malaysia to Turkey to Qatar to Kuwait, Nigeria, Indonesia, UAE, Mauritius, they are all our members. So I think it's very important. And we are also talking to non-members at the moment and some other international bodies. So hopefully we'll be able to actually work on this soon. And in order to qualify as HQLA assets, the asset actually has to be liquid in markets during a time of stress, just like the COVID-19, the pandemic we're talking about. You have to be able to liquidate the asset immediately. And ideally, you have to be able to make it what we call the central bank eligible kind of instrument. And this is where the reg treatment aspect is very important. You all know about the Basel III liquidity coverage ratio, which I mentioned earlier on the LCR. The implementation, the way it promotes the short-term resilience of a bank's liquidity risk profile. It does this by ensuring that a bank has an adequate stock of unencumbered high-quality liquid assets, the HQLA, that can be converted into cash easily and immediately in private markets to meet its liquidity needs for a 30-day calendar day liquidity stress scenario. And again, this is why we have actually introduced the 1 month support, which the market actually likes a lot. And we've been offering more of this. As you're all aware, the BIS, the Bank for International Settlement, has given the flexibility to regulators which actually have a shortage of Islamic HQLA in their respective jurisdictions to recognize the papers they deem appropriate as alternative high quality liquid instruments. So this is where we keep this engagement very active with different jurisdictions. And inshallah, I think we're going to work more on this. Whether they are members of the IILM or not, we're going to ensure that we actually ensure there's a reg treatment for our paper across different jurisdictions. At the moment, the IILM reg treatment are based on each regulator criteria at the start of the IILM issuances. So they all have their different criteria. So that's why you have this varying kind of reg treatment. Again, this explains some differences in the current recognition of the paper, as you can see on the screen, basically. I mean, in Malaysia, it's a level 1 paper from the liquidity perspective, zero risk weight, under the capital adequacy ratio. In Turkey, it's a difference, a level 2A liquid asset paper. It's considered as that. Qatar is level 2A. Kuwait 2A, Nigeria is level 1, Mauritius is level 1, UAE is level 2A. So these were actually based on the initial data we had at inception. So we're going to revisit most of these. Now we have enough track record, to actually go back to the central banks to reconsider some of the reg treatment we have. And I think, let me move on. I don't spend much time on this. Now, in terms of the achievements, I guess, again, I don't say much. It's quite clear, particularly during the pandemic, we've been able to, offer this kind of, tradable paper, and which is widely acceptable under the Sharia principles denominated in US dollars for cross-border trading. And it's a safe haven for Islamic liquidity management. Safe haven, it's more important during crisis. And that's why the COVID crisis, which is still ongoing, actually, I think is the best test, the litmus test you can have for an institution like the IILM. Since the GFC in 2008 and 2009, we've not really had a black swan kind of event like this, where we need to really test the resilience and the relevance of the IILM itself. And I think this is the first time, and I thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for allowing us to be able to withstand the pressure, basically, and to perform the role for which we were established initially. And also, I thank our stakeholders. We do have a very good team of governors. I mean, they are very, very helpful. They attend all our meetings, including the Qatari governor, Kuwait, UAE, and all of the Malaysia, Indonesia. They are always very helpful. And this aspect is very important because, the IILM is an international organization which is not regulated. So if you're not regulated, you need very strong governance. And this is where you have all these highly experienced governors sitting across the table to determine all our policies. Now, finally, let me actually explain a bit about the impact. And I think this is very important. I just have a few slides for this, and we're going to conclude the presentation. The impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. Yes, this is very important for us. And as an institution, as I've mentioned earlier on, yes, we also faced a number of challenges during the peak. And the peak was March, April. And I think we are, in our own case, we felt it during the April auction. I don't explain what is LOIs, what is OIS. I'm sure everybody here is a banker. I mean, you're familiar with all these terms. I mean, the barometer, for measuring, the health of the market itself, the money market itself. That's the LOIs index basically. So here we're actually trying to compare the ILLM Sukuk profit rate. Looking at the correlation, particularly using the benchmark, which is a 3-month tenor only. Remember, we do issue 1, 3, 6, 2 weeks, 1 month, 3 weeks. But again, we're using the benchmark size here, which is the 3-month tenor, and try to actually correlate it with the USD liquidity index, the CDS of emerging markets. And you can see where we are basically. I think we still performed well, even though there was this spike basically, and the whole market was affected. And I think that was the major area where we got affected during the pandemic, where we had to pay a higher profit rate to the investors. But the whole thing normalized subsequently, as you've seen on the graph, the first one on the top. Yeah. Now again, the impact on the IILM issuances and opportunities. Yes, this is quite important to actually see where we are. Now, amongst the 16 IILM Sukuk printed year to date for a total of 4.91 billion, within that period, basically, I think 1.06 billion was reissued during the peak of the coronavirus pandemic. And I think this is quite important to note that we're just trying to give the data for last year. And in April, specifically, in the April 2020 auction, the spread we paid actually surged across all tenors amid the USD global liquidity squeeze, affecting all credit spreads during that period. And I'll say, year to date within that period as well, between, let's say, April to June, within that period, I think the average spread remained healthy at 14 bips after the June 2020 auction, despite the high April level. So the whole thing normalized. As you can see, I cannot do the I wanted to show you what I'm saying, basically. Again, I don't want to mess up the presentation from here. But I think it's fine. You can see the graphs on the screen. Now, in March 2020, let me finish with this before I move on to the next slide. A number of affected countries also, as you know, imposed mandatory or partial lockdown on non-essential services. While this had some negative impact on the short-end liabilities, the IILM actually benefited from the income from the assets as well. And again, this was the peak of our origination efforts. We were under lockdown in our respective houses, but we actually had to up our origination efforts. And it provided a window for us, to secure a high margin spread on a new asset. Again, I'm not going to say much about this. I think you should understand why. And let me move on to, yes, I do have this slide on secondary market. This is very important because this is part of our mandate. And you need to see what happened during the pandemic, how it actually hit the IILM, and how we recovered over time, as you can see. Now we've highlighted the peak of the pandemic. I mean, what happened in terms of the secondary market trading. The secondary volume has reduced drastically amidst the pandemic. Yes, it reduced within that time. But at the start of the pandemic, there was barely no trading on the secondary. And subsequently, the secondary market trading started to pick up slightly, as you can see. It started picking up, in September, October, gradually, even though we had a drop in December, which is natural. December, we all know. By November, most, traders, they've squared their books. So there is no much happening in December. So December is an outlier here. So we should just take that out, basically. But you can see the uptick in the secondary market trading subsequently. And it's surprising that even in March 2021, the trading volume actually increased to $283 million. And so this is quite important. Again, this shows you the impact of the pandemic here on the banks. Most of the banks, they needed to, this is where you really see the action when it comes to liquidity management. The ability to dump some of this sukuk immediately for cash to fulfill their obligations. So this is why tracking the secondary market trading is very important for us. And it's one of our major mandates. And after every auction, we do track this and we have all the relevant data. Now, actions we took, during the COVID-19 crisis in 2020, the crisis is still on. But again, these are some of the things we did. In summary, let me just provide a kind of a global summary. We actually increased the program size to $4 billion, as you can see. And that was the first time, it's the highest program size we've ever had since inception. We funded 2 new assets for a total of $1.55 billion to help a sovereign to tackle the impact of COVID-19 in its jurisdiction. This is important. This is why I said we are not only looking at the short end, we also look at the other side of the curve itself, where we provide long-term funding to sovereign institutions. This helped a lot. We are aware that IDB has been doing a lot as well, issuing a lot of sukuk, to help different countries, for COVID-19 palliatives. So similarly, we do our own through private placement. So that's why you do not actually see this, in the news, as it were. Ours is basically based on private placements, and it's not really announced to the market. And another thing we did was we increased the total volume of our monthly issuances by 80%, from $1.96 billion to $3.51 billion. Again, this was meant to address the market needs for high quality Islamic instruments during the pandemic year itself, during the first year of the pandemic, and now we're in the second year. Now, another point I would like to make here is the adjustment we made to some tenures to fit the investors' needs, especially increasing the size of short-term tenures like the 1 month, which we introduced in 2019. We had to increase the size during the pandemic because we saw the uptick generally. And we reduced the size of the longer tenure, such as 6 months, because investors were not actually interested in the longer tenure because a lot of uncertainties were there hanging in the air. And one other thing we did was we increased the tradability ratio to 79% for wider Sharia acceptance of the paper itself. And again, this is something we feel is very important, and this is the first time we are getting to almost 80% of the tradability. So these were some of the things we had to do, some actions we had to take immediately to ensure we fulfill our mandate at the global level. And again, this was meant to complement some of the kind of monetary policies, as well as the fiscal. I don't want to go into the fiscal policies, but it's more of the monetary policies taken by central banks and monetary authorities across the world in their respective jurisdictions. But there was nobody taking care of the cross-border market. And that's how we had to step in. And I had to sit with my team. I said, guys, look, what do we do? And we had to do A, B, C, D, and ultimately we ended the year providing the market with more instruments, and we hope the market is happy with it. And just before I conclude today's lecture, I would like to emphasize again that this slide is more of a recap of key features of the IILM Sukuk and its relevance amidst the COVID-19 liquidity stress. There were a lot of lessons learned during the whole pandemic. I can tell you, internally, we learned so much lessons, and the need for us to actually take additional steps on certain fronts, which I'm not going to discuss in an open event like this. But again, it's important for us to say that the relevance of a tradable Islamic instrument was further emphasized during the pandemic, which is still ongoing. The need to actually have the primary dealer support. And again, I thank our primary dealers, and some of them are some of the banks you have in Qatar. They've been very supportive. This is something very important, particularly as market makers during a pandemic year. And again, the HQLA direct treatment, which I mentioned earlier on, I think it's important, and they need to have a large and diversified investor base, which again, it's something important for us to ensure that we perform our policy mandate. Now, on a final note, these are my takeaways today. The coronavirus pandemic should serve as a wake-up call and should be a catalyst for the much needed progress in the development of the Islamic financial markets globally. It's something very important for us. For us, in every cloud, you should always look out for the silver lining. It's something very important. You should never be disappointed in your life. You're under lockdown at home, wherever you are in the world, whether you're in Europe or in the US or in Qatar. If you're locked down in your home, think of something you want to do. Look at it as an opportunity. How do you improve yourself? Same thing here for the Islamic financial institutions across the world and the industry itself. We have to actually take this as a wake-up call and try to turn this to our advantage. And this is why it's important for us to explore some of this kind of way forward. Now, more issuers of short-term Islamic instruments, as well as broad and active investors, will definitely support a deeper Islamic money market and the establishment of a much-needed Islamic benchmark yield curve for the Islamic finance industry, which I mentioned earlier on. This is very important, especially with the upcoming LIBOR transition end, which is imminent. And the IILM effort focusing on the short end of the curve by consistently issuing benchmark size sovereign-backed sukuk, more than $1 billion every month. It's we do this in various tenors. Again, this is very important, and it supports the creation of a low risk or a risk-free rate curve. So this is something, again, we should be looking into. And as we proceed, we are going to come up with more policies that will actually even make it a risk-free kind of instrument. Finally, the coronavirus pandemic should serve as a wake-up call to deepen the Islamic money market and set up what we call an active Islamic repo facility backed by high-quality assets. Again, someone will ask me, you should be the one to do it. Yes, I agree. Pray for us, and hopefully we're going to get there. I thank you very much for listening, and I thank the organizers. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you very much, Dr. Umar, for this impressive journey, taking us through this impressive journey of the IILM and what the IILM has achieved. I would just like making the calculations that between 2013 with the 980 million issuance to 12 billion in 2020, that's more than 1,000% increase, which is impressive in such a short time. And I guess we have, it's also the uniqueness of the model itself, whereby, as you mentioned, you're supporting sovereigns in raising financing for their budgetary needs, for their infrastructure, to meet in COVID-19, budget spending needs, etc., while also meeting the liquidity requirements of the market and supporting not only Islamic financial institutions. By the way, and I think that has been clearly emphasized in your presentation, that investment in the IILM short-term sukuk is open also to any other financial institution, not necessarily Islamic, but we've seen that Islamic institutions are the main, have been the main investors across various jurisdictions. We have received few questions from the floor. We have about 20 minutes. And I think the presentation was so rich and passionate that we didn't see the time passing, but you pretty much covered like all of the interesting points that were also raised in the questions. There was some questions because I know our audience, we have our students, but also some market participants, and among our students also we have practitioners. There is some interest from bankers here, actually, I see in Qatar about the sukuk, and perhaps we need to invite you for a special session to the financial institutions here in Qatar. But if we could elaborate further on the distribution mechanism. I know you mentioned the primary dealers network. Sorry, I guess there is an echo. So if you can further elaborate on that. And also there was a question on how does IILM provide short-term liquidity support to banks? I think this is a bit like a misunderstanding. If you could clarify that for the audience.
Okay, sure. Thank you very much, Dr. Dalal. And just to start, let me start with the last question. Yes, whether we provide liquidity support to banks, basically, this is a very important thing. We do it in a different way by providing high quality liquid assets to the banks at competitive rates. So you can think of competing, we are competing with US Treasury kind of, yield. So we provide this, yes, but in a different way. I do understand what the question, actually means. I think talking about providing cash directly to banks, yeah. We do not do this at the moment, but inshallah, I think this is part of the future plans in terms of developing a kind of an Islamic repo facility within the IILM, where we'll be able to provide, some of this, liquidity to the banks. But again, I think for now it's good enough that we are providing high quality liquid assets. So in a way, I'll say we're providing liquidity to the banks. And yes, this is. Then for the first question regarding our distribution mechanism, yes, we do have a panel of primary dealers, and we signed what they call the primary dealer agreement. Again, this is typical to the central bank model, which they use for their issuances. So the primary dealer agreement basically actually allows us to engage with a number of banks across the world, and some of them are global banks. In Qatar, I think we do have QIB, and previously we had QNB, the Qatar National Bank. And in Malaysia, we have the Maybank, we have CIMB. Then global banks like Standard Chartered banks are also there, and they all participate in our auctions. Now, what they do basically is they bid at the primary market when we issue our sukuk. Like we'll be issuing in 2 weeks' time. So they have their minimum commitments, so they come to bid. And once they bid their minimum commitment, they also get orders from investors. And as we have seen I think in the past 1 year or so, most of the orders we get, even at the primary market, are from investors. Let me say 60% of our orders at the primary market are from investors. So apart from the trading you're going to have at the secondary market, at the primary market itself, you have significant orders up to 60% from investors. So I think this is quite good. And these primary dealers, they are market makers. They actually provide what they call a two-way quote, and they actually sell. When they buy at the primary, they sell at the secondary. So this is the role they play. And there is a formal kind of engagement we have with them. And again, we have all these requirements to become a primary dealer on our website. We are happy to onboard even new banks to become PDs, to be able to distribute our papers. It adds, very good value to their profile as well as banks. So this is it.
Thank you, Dr. Umar. Now, that takes me to another key question, which is another key feature of the IILM Sukuk, which you clearly mentioned when you spoke about the regulatory treatment of the paper. I mean, you spoke about the reserve management, the collateral, but also the HQLA, which is very important for meeting the LCR under Basel III. Now, how regulatory support is important for an institution like the IILM? We have, of course, explained what is happening in other jurisdictions, but how is it important as compared to any other sukuk?
Yeah, I think the regulatory support is very important. And as I mentioned during the presentation, without it, it will be difficult for banks to be able to, even to buy at the primary market itself here, because here we're talking about the use of the paper itself. They use it for different reasons. So if you look at the capital and liquidity buffers that banks now have in place, they were designed to be available, to have a number of kind of source of capital and liquidity to support the economy, particularly during the adverse situations such as the impacts of COVID-19. And this actually enables the bank to continue lending, to perform their own role or perform their financial intermediation role. Now, globally, the central banks have and are still encouraging banks to use their kind of, capital and liquidity buffers as they make loans available to households and businesses affected by COVID-19 restrictions. Now, that's on one side. Now, the regulatory part is also very important. This is where we talk about accommodative measures through relaxing range of prudential regulations to ease potential liquidity constraints, like loosening of Basel III liquidity, requirements. This actually happened. It had some impact on IILM as well at some point. And again, banks benefited from regulatory support indeed, but the IILM, on the contrary, managed to sustain itself on its own. This is something very important. Banks, yes, they actually had some of this loosening of the regulatory requirements on one's end, but the IILM, its role is not to loosen regulatory kind of requirement because it's not a regulator. Its role is to provide this instrument. So once the banks actually reduce or loosened the LCR, holding kind of ratios, the requirements for the banks, then that's when we saw a kind of a minor drop in in the uptake, of our paper itself. So we actually saw some of these kind of, regulatory effect, whether from the perspective of, the reg treatment, which we actually need, that's on one side. Then with the COVID-19, loosening all these kind of regulatory requirements, it had negative impact on our sukuk as well. So these are some of the things, again, we've been grappling with, and we've had this engagement with a number of central bank governors, and I always thank our governors, for, guiding us appropriately on what to do at every point in time. So the regulatory kind of support you mentioned actually is a double-edged sword. Yeah, on one side it can cut, and on the other side, you can think of cutting carrot or even cutting yourself, basically. So it's a double-edged sword, basically. On one side, yes, we need it. It helps us. But during COVID-19 year, we faced some challenges because they actually stepped in, the central banks, as part of their monetary kind of policies. But it had some negative impact on our own sukuk.
Thank you, Dr. Umar. Now, I think it's clearly like through the achievements of the IILM that the institution developed significantly and we spoke about its impact since inception on the Islamic financial industry. Now, let's look at a bit the future and talk about obviously the bright future of the IILM from what we can see. So you spoke about increasing the program size in the past. What are the future plans of the IILM? Are there any plans to further increase the program size? And also in terms of membership, because this is also a very important point, because I assume we have also participants from other jurisdictions, which actually we invite, or I invite to also join the IILM. What are any plans of attracting new members?
Perfect, good question, and thank you for that question. Again, as you know, I mean, our plans are actually in the pipeline and they are not revealed until they are finally hatched, you know. But again, I'd like to just say a few words on this. Our support, basically, if you look at our footprint in the market, it's already 8-year-old, basically. We started in August 2013. Now this is 2021. And throughout this period, we've had investors and primary dealers, you know, they've guided our initiatives to expand further, you know, our markets while addressing our original mandate. So this is one. I think it's very important. I'm going to say a few words regarding membership later. So, but let me focus on the market side, basically, in terms of expanding the program size. Now, the milestone we achieved in 2020, whereby we actually increased the program size to $4 billion, was driven by the increasing demand from the market itself for high quality money market instruments. So despite the increasing supply, we've seen this increasing demand, as I've shown during the presentation. Now, the implication of this is the right question, rather, to just increase this program size once again should be, what will the IILM further brings to the Islamic financial institutions? Again, rather than asking whether we should increase the program size, if you ask me today, I can increase it to $10 billion, definitely. Yeah. But the issue here is rather than issuing or increasing the program size, I think I should think of providing more liquidity tools to the market itself. So this is where we have been brainstorming internally, strategizing and engaging with our board to see what we can do in terms of the program itself. Yes, you can even have a situation where, even though I'm not promising that we're going to do this, you could have even an A2 program. You could have an A1 plus program at the same time, separate programs, you run them at the same time with different program sizes. So there are a lot of things we can do. But again, we are guided by kind of risk, kind of mitigation. We take into consideration all the risk involved before we take certain steps. Yes, it's true, we should be thinking of increasing the program. Yes, I think it's something the market needs, but I see it from a broader perspective on what can the IILM do beyond this monthly issuances and providing the short-term instrument to the market. And this is what we are actually considering internally. We do have a lot of strategic kind of meetings, even at the management committee level from time to time, to brainstorm on some of these things. So I think it's important. And based on the recurrent Islamic markets players' needs, I think we foresee the expansion of the IILM program by standardizing the rep treatment itself across regions. For me, this is a major target. How do we ensure it's actually standardized across board? And I think this is a major focus we'll be actually exploring, I mean, in the next coming months and years, inshallah. Again, diversifying the tenures, you know, up to 1 year. I think this is another important thing. Again, if members of the press are here, they shouldn't misquote me. I'm not saying we're going to do it today, but I'm just saying things we can do in future, basically. It's by actually fulfilling the whole curve from 1 day to 364 days. This is something we are looking into. And I think when the time comes, the market will hear from us, we're going to do it. Yes, we've been getting a lot of feedback from the market. We've got a lot of questions regarding this, you know, when are we going to issue, you know, a 12-month paper? Yes, we are coming when we are going to inform the market at the appropriate time, inshallah. And currently, I think the IILM is only addressing one part of liquidity management, as you know, and I think which is like managing excess cash, you know, this is something very important. But I think we can actually play a bigger role, as I mentioned during the presentation, of establishing a kind of Islamic repo market. Again, these are things that can be considered in future. I'm not saying we're going to do them today or this year, but inshallah, these are things we'll be actually exploring. But again, for this, we're going to bring together different practitioners to explore the possibility, because as you know, Islamic repo has its own controversial issues a lot. And we are even trying to organize a roundtable in the next coming weeks. Yes, soon we're going to have a roundtable where we're going to bring together Sharia scholars, legal scholars, market players to discuss specifically the need for an Islamic repo market and what we need to know. So I'm already discussing with with my counterparts in other international organizations like IFFM, AOFI, IFSB. Some of them will be involved in this workshop, inshallah.
That's very interesting, and effectively, that's another important tool, like how to provide the Islamic repo alternative. And I know there have been also initiatives in the market, and effectively, the role of the IILM as leader to bring together all of these experts to brainstorm about the topic is very important. So that brings me to another question, which you highlighted earlier, the importance of engaging other strategic institutions like the IFM, the IFSB, the AOFI. All of these are, in a way, pillar institutions in Islamic financial industry. And that highlights the role of the importance of partnerships and engagement with other institutions. What has been achieved up to date, like in terms of MOUs and also in terms of engagements with other MDBs, because we've seen the Islamic Development Bank was one of the key partners to the institution in a way since the beginning. But how about the other MDBs, and what other MOUs has the institution signed so far?
Thank you very much, Dr. Dalal. Beautiful question, and we've done a lot, on that front. Again, personally, I believe in action even before MOUs here. But before I came on board as acting CEO and later the CEO of this organization, I think we've signed a number of MOUs with the Asian Development Bank, the African Development Bank, with a number of MDBs, even the Monetary Fund also. So we signed a number of MOUs already. And again, our own job was to dust some of these MOUs and actually hit the ground running and see what we can do. And I think that was very important for us. So we continue to link up with the MDBs. I've had a series of engagements, even with the World Bank Treasury team as well. We've had a high-level engagement with IDB, the Islamic Development Bank. So there is a continuous kind of a thing on a bilateral basis, across various kind of avenues of collaboration, spanning even potential guarantee structures for our sukuk. Yeah, these are things we're exploring, and given the significant, government policy responses of COVID-19. There has been an increased kind of need to seek additional funding in certain sectors. So this is where we're closely working with MDBs to see how we can work together. We have the funding, but you just come and step in and provide a guarantee if you're highly rated. So if I want to fund any kind of, if I want to fund a particular country that is not rated A and above, because we do have a minimum threshold, which I did not mention. This is just a short public lecture. There are a lot we could actually share regarding our program structure. We only fund countries that are rated A and above. So if I want to fund a country that is rated below A, the simple thing I can do basically is to get an MDB to provide a guarantee, the third-party guarantee. We have designed this, a Sharia-compliant third-party guarantee framework internally. We do have the agreement, which we have used for some deals in the GCC. I'm not going to mention names. And we told some of the MDBs, guys, we can guide you technically, providing the technical advice to be able to actually do this and support countries, because our main aim is to be able to fund developing countries within the OIC in particular. So how do we do this? Many of them are not rated up to our minimum threshold. The only solution is to actually do what you call credit enhancement. And this is where the third-party guarantee element comes in, which is very important. So we're trying to work out a solution to be able to fund some of the sovereigns, particularly with the pandemic now. We get so much requests. I'm inundated with kind of requests for funding all the time across the world. But I need to provide a solution to fix this issue of guarantee. And this is where the engagement with MDBs is very important for us. And I thank you for that question. It's very, very important and very close to our heart.
Thank you very much, Dr. Umar. I guess this is a very important point, because sometimes it is overlooked, like the origination side and the support for sovereigns, and how the IILM could potentially also support, as you mentioned, developing countries by, through some good structures like developing guarantees, etc., credit enhancement, and by engaging other MDBs. So I guess this brings me to our last question. We have about 3 minutes. I promise to keep the time, because I know it's iftar soon in Malaysia, and then we hope our friends who are joining from Malaysia happy iftar, actually. My last question would be more about the future, and basically starting from your last point, that we know now that everyone is talking about the new normal after the pandemic, and how the pandemic reshaped the business models of a number of institutions. Does that apply to the ILM as well? So how would these outlook that you mentioned, all of these initiatives, and also the impact of the pandemic on the Islamic financial industry, will this also reshape the future of the ILM?
Well, definitely it will. And I'm going to give you an example because, again, I'm going to keep to time. I don't want to say much, so I'll keep to your time. Yes, it's going to impact from different perspectives, from the business operations perspective, from the corporate side as well. I mean, I can share with you that some of the actions we did were actually done from home. Yeah. So we provided a lot of infrastructure. We had to set up a kind of makeshift home offices for our core team with Bloomberg and everything in place. And we had to improvise because at the point, there was a total lockdown in Kuala Lumpur where we are based. So I think it's changing the way, we're working. And even now, we are working partly from home. Half of the team is in the office for 3 days. The other half comes the following week. So from the corporate side, yeah, it's going to change a lot of things going forward. Now, from the business operations side, as you have seen throughout my discussions today, yes, it's changing many things. And it has changed even the way we offer, our sukuk. Even the slicing of the different tenors, it has impacted it. Yeah. Now we see more of investors looking for longer tenors. That's the kind of latest experience, which is different from what we experienced a year ago, where most investors wanted short, ultra short kind of instruments, 1 month or even less. Yeah, but now we are seeing the reverse, and the more investors are looking for kind of longer tenure. So I think this is something we have to adjust as much as possible, and as much as possible, again, think of automating many things. Yeah, which we are trying to do internally. Yeah, we do our auction using the Bloomberg AUPD platform, which is customized and designed specifically for the IILM. Yeah, I think the team. My team is the business operations team head is Hisham Buknis, and he himself and the team, they work very closely with Bloomberg to actually build this unique platform for Islamic kind of action. So many things are being automated internally. So definitely the pandemic has taught us a lot of lessons, and we're going to change the way we do things going forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Umar, for this very insightful presentation. I'm sure we also received insightful questions from the floor. I tried to group them and summarize them so that we also meet the time limit. Thank you very much for taking us through this impressive journey of the IILM. I'm sure the participant learned a lot from what has been achieved, but also your future initiatives. And we'll be happy to learn more about the future initiatives of the IILM. So we'll be following the IILM operations and all and activities. Thank you very much. And thank you for our participants for joining us in this holy month of Ramadan. So we wish, as I mentioned, a happy iftar to those who are breaking fast soon. And we hope to see you in our future lectures from the College of Islamic Studies at HBKU. Thank you very much. And assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you.